Hey everybody, welcome back to the Brand Design Masters podcast. I'm your host, Philip VanDusen, and today I'm super excited because I am here with Christine Mao. Christine is the VP of Brand Strategy at Medline, which is a healthcare company. Previously, she served as a Senior Director of Global Design at Kimberly Clark for over 15 years, leading the global design thinking transformation for brands like Kleenex and Huggies and Kotex. Ad Age has called her a woman to watch, and she's built a career leveraging the power of brands with organizations, agencies, and institutions all over the world. Her teams have won the design awards like the Diamond Penta Awards, Reggie's, Effie's, AIGA, ID, Print, and the Die-Line Awards, among many others. And on a personal note, Christine and I attended the AIGA's Business Perspectives for Creative Leaders at Harvard University program over, I think, a decade ago. And
That was like yesterday.
yeah, we've been friends and colleagues forever and since. So with that, I welcome Christine.
Thank you so much, Philip. I am so excited to be here. I think when you started doing the posting and the videos, I was one of the first people to like follow you. So I take great pride in that. Like I knew you when, and it's exciting to see what you've done with this. I think it's so important and so valuable to people. Like if I had had this gift when I was starting out, the ability to like see and hear some of these things and know you're not the only one who's confused about this or has a question about that or doesn't really know what that looks like invaluable, especially to those like just starting their career. So I'm
Oh, that's
excited
so
to be
sweet.
here.
Thank you so much. And I did not pay Christine to say that, so I
No.
really do owe you at this point. So, Christine, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are, and maybe drop a personal note just to give people a sense of Christine.
Okay, so I started my career really on my own in Wisconsin, set up my own camp. And at this point, I'm doing like a lot of like small branding and a lot of like print and pattern illustration work. And that's how I got connected to Kimberly Clark. I started doing a lot of just the little animals that would go on the diapers or the flowers that go on the paper
Really? I
towels.
don't know that I
Yeah.
even knew that.
And then that led into packaging work, which led into branding work, which led into kind of trend forecasting and design. And then that led into the campaigns, and that led into kind of the brand foundational tools, and then the design thinking and innovation. And so, like, I have just sort of built and followed like my curiosity for like once I kind of would get really good at one thing, and then I was like, I was ready for the next thing. And I was so appreciative that they allowed and still allow their employees to do that and grow with them and kind of follow that. So I had a great time. I had an international assignment in looking over Europe, Middle East, Africa, with a location out in London, still for Kimberly Clark. And then when I came back, things have sort of changed in the organization, and they just weren't going to kind of do some of these things that I was really excited about anymore. And that's why I took kind of a pause in my career. So it was like, okay, well, what do I do? Because I thought I worked for the best company, and and I was proud to say I worked for that company. So I was looking for something similar in that I have these three things. I want to have challenging and interesting work. I want to work for a company that I'm proud of, that I feel like reflects my values, in a culture that is really curious and supportive and collaborative. And I found that at Medline in healthcare. So I did a bit of a pivot over from both a CPG and a design management, design branding focus to healthcare, and at the same time pivoted over to strategy, which
Hmm.
has been that was a big transition for me.
Yeah, and yet another large kind of pivot in your skill set, right?
Yeah.
And so, explain a little bit about Medline. Before we hit record, you were telling me a little bit about who they are, what they used to be, and kind of what they're like now. How do you utilize
Yeah.
strategy within Medline?
Yeah. So Medline's not a household name, at least not yet. Um, it when I started, it was about a $9 billion business to business medical supply company, medical devices, supplies, everything you need to run your, whether it's your hospital, your physician's office, your nursing care center. And they would it was a kind of a supply and distributor manufacturer um, advantage. Like we could get you everything you need, and it'd be very reliable, and it'd be um, really affordable for you. And as everything evolves and the landscape evolves, we started to think like, and Medline before I got there said like, we're going to start to look at like, how do we build our equity? How do we get affinity for this brand so that we're not going to be always, maybe looking at what is the cost, because our customers, we found out, thought all of us and our competitors were all like really good. So they would just say, well, so we buy on price, right? So
Right.
how do we really stand out and differentiate ourselves and become more of that strategic partner? So that's about where I entered Medline, of how do we go on that journey and go from selling onesies, twosies items to start thinking about, well, what is the customer's biggest need, and how can we bundle everything together? So maybe, topic of today is like infection prevention. So maybe we should be looking at how do we pull all that together, bring together our thought leadership with our clinicians. So I work with like nurses and doctors, and bring those points of view in and publish that content, and take that all the way through to really helping them with their most urgent uh, problems and things that they're needing today. So I find that really meaningful work. I found like greater purpose in that.
Mm.
I loved every minute of what I did before. And, don't regret any of that, but super excited to be where I am today and feel like, there's real purpose to my role in healthcare.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've just helped them zoom out from being completely product focused to being much more kind of theme and more, meta focused around human need in
Yeah.
whatever category or vertical that is. So actually, it's funny as you were explaining your career at Kimberly Clark, because we have a lot in common that way. When I basically came up through the fashion industry in very much the same way, I went into Old Navy as a senior designer and left as a VP in charge of like 4 divisions and stuff. But it was this amazing rocket ship ride of them throwing challenges and people and everything at me over a period of time. So I grew with the company, and my ability
Yeah.
to lead people and manage budgets and all that sort of stuff grew over time. And it sounds like you've had exactly the same thing. That's pretty. I don't hear it a lot that people really come in. You were a freelancer. You were like outside of the company and
Yeah.
then came into the company and worked your way up. What was that like? How did you orchestrate that? Apart from
Yeah.
being
That,
incredibly smart, which is what I know you are.
thank you. Um, and yeah, I don't know if everyone does enough of this, which is I started doing, as I said, the product aesthetics. And they would give me like, oh, once in a while someone would be busy, I might work on the packaging. But I made it known I want to do more of this. And I can show you and demonstrate that I can do more of this. And, I started doing that before maybe I had the title. Sometimes I hear people say like, oh, well, I'm not being compensated. That's not my title. It's like, you're being given an opportunity. They're giving you a chance. What they're saying is, I think you can do it. You just do one or two, and the rest will come. And so I was always very precise about where I thought I could continue to add value. I would start to, in my volunteer, like I volunteered with like nonprofits, I would do work there, which was maybe strategy work, or it was maybe, figuring something out or creating a marketing campaign. And so I could bring those skills in back in and say, hey, look at what I did.
Mm.
I wanted, can I come along on that integrated marketing campaign planning? I think there's a really important reason why design should be in the room on that. And this is what we talked about a little bit before, of how I would label myself as design. Um, because truly, I don't think I was always bringing design in the room. I was bringing design thinking, and I was bringing strategy. Um, but I had labeled myself as a designer. And I think at one point that was a little limiting. And by that, I mean, when I left Kimberly Clark as a senior director of like global brand design. So now I'm looking for what's my next move. And, I'm in Chicago, so there's a lot of food here. And that wasn't high on my list of things that I thought I wanted to do. And I had reached out to someone at Medline, previously worked with, and asked if I could just practice a presentation for like a conference on their team. And they're like, oh, yeah, come in. And so I went in and did that. And then they said, hey, we're writing a position description for Senior Director of Brand Strategy. Can you help us with that? And I thought, oh, sure. You come from the agency side, I've been in the big corporations. I can help with that. So I helped with that, provided feedback. About a month later, I got a call. I've been watching and you haven't applied yet.
To the job description you wrote.
Because it was as for a senior director of brand strategy. And I didn't see myself. I had so internalized that label. But these people had worked with me and they saw that I had these other skills as well. And so I was always a designer trying to get in and talk about strategy. And that was my own limiting belief, limiting label, and seeing myself then through someone else's eyes to go, oh, I was actually doing strategy with a focus on design, because I do feel that strategy has to be executed all the way through to the execution, or it just becomes less effective. So that's how I made that transition, one to healthcare, and then two, that giant pivot from being focused just solely on design to being focused on strategy.
So you were working and leading design thinking in Kimberly Clark. For the listeners who may not know what design thinking is, can you characterize what actually design thinking is and how you implement that in a big corporation like Kimberly Clark, what that means for a brand?
Yeah, so it took years, like 5 or 6 years, to really drive it through the first time in North America. And then now I'm going to do it in Europe. And I probably achieved that in about 18 months. And then EMEA and Europe, Middle East, Africa achieved that in about 9 months. And what I learned along the way was design thinking is really a collaborative way of looking at what is the real problem you're trying to solve. So don't jump just to the thing of if we want to sell more I want to sell more widgets. So how do I get people to buy more widgets? So it might be really unpacking the problem. It might not just be that people aren't aware, but maybe that's not relevant anymore, right? You do a whole discovery and ethnographic research, like you build empathy. You go like, if I want to sell facial tissue to someone, I'm going to go and walk behind that mom for a day and see how she uses it, how she buys it, how she interacts, see what the other things are where she could have been using it. What are her substitutions currently when she doesn't have it, right? So I'm building real empathy for the situation, and then saying, okay, I think I now know the problem is, how might we do X? So it's always framing it. How might we, like, build, get this product into her life in this way? How can we help solve this problem? And then doing rapid iteration. So instead of spending a year building something, spending a lot of R&D and getting something really finalized and perfect, and then showing it to a consumer for their feedback, you show them a taped up sketch, whatever you can with the duct tape and the straws, and you go, hey, what if we did this? And they go, well, it's too big to hold in my hand, or it's too small, right? Or I need it's so now you go to balsa wood, right? And you whip something up and you're like, hey, how about this? And then they're like, oh yeah, that's so much better. But why is it so heavy? Oh, okay. And iterate again. So it's this idea of rapid prototyping and testing to learn, which is very different from testing to validate. So what we see a lot in corporate America is they will spend a lot of time internally with just us guys, who may not be the end user, deciding what we think is going to be perfect. Like I said, spending a year or two on it, and then proudly showing it to the consumer to validate that we got it right, only to find out either that we didn't, and now you've invested a lot of time and money you won't get back, or you try to justify, oh, those, they didn't really know what they're talking about, and you launch it anyway, and then you don't get you failed. So just wanting to kind of bridge that, so that you go from learning, fast prototyping, and when you learn, you're like, oh, thank you for that feedback, we're going to adjust it. And you're just doing that every month, so at the end of the year, you've already had 12 sessions, you've learned 12 times. By the time you get to the end, you have a really good, viable product that people are excited about and maybe even delighted by, instead of like, oh, okay.
Also,
I guess I would use, yeah, maybe I would buy it. Yeah, I guess if you put cheese on it, maybe.
I've also found that design thinking is really helpful internally, because then so many people are included in that process that when you come
Yeah,
out the other end with the prototype, it's not like it's the first time merchandising or production has seen it, right? So there's not like
right.
this gang on like, oh, it's too big, it's too heavy. Hey, it's made out of balsa wood. It's more of a team effort. So everyone has a thumbprint on it to a certain extent, which is harder because of, everyone wants their thumbprint on it as you're going through that design thinking process. But
Yeah.
it tends to turn out a better, more feasible product in the long term, right?
And design thinking doesn't have to be, and often isn't, led by design, to the design team. Design thinking can be led by marketing, it can be led by insights, it can be led by the innovation team. It's really about each person bringing their expertise at different times. So at certain times, as the design person, I might have lead of the ball and control, but there's other times where the insights person, especially during the ethnography, might have more of the planning and the strategy, and let me tell you what this means, and this is how we're going to conduct this research, and this will be better. And then yes, you have your R&D folks who are saying like, okay, there's different ways we can make this, because it can't be a $20 thing. Like this one-time disposable thing can't be $20. So we have to figure out how are we going to make it. So yes, it's very collaborative, and it is a very cross-functional thing from day one. Yeah.
So we were talking about before we went live. You were talking about you were speaking at an event, and a woman approached you. It was like
Yeah.
Fuse or How or something, and she asked you a question. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that?
So at the end of my presentation, this lovely woman came up and she's like, I have a question. And she goes, can a designer be a strategist? And I was like, I was taken aback a little bit. I was like, well, you can be anything you want to be. And I was like, well, why are you asking? And she's like, well, my boss told me that designers can't become strategists. So I was like, okay, well, let's talk about like if you have the right boss at this point.
Yeah.
Um, but really, design is a problem solving endeavor. So designing is kind of design thinking. It's not that exact discipline, but you can clearly see how design thinking is utilized by designers every day. And the whole idea of design thinking, which is the real discovery of what's going on and the investigation, and then distilling down to what's most important, is a lot of what's in strategy. And for me, strategy it's a facilitation of decision making. So when I go in with a new group, I don't know if that's the best, I don't know, like surgical procedure tray ever, or why it's better. Um, but I'm there to facilitate that they understand the tools and that don't add 17 things as their positioning statement, right? It's about just helping guide and distill to make decisions. So a designer can do that, because a designer has to develop, right, like 17 different layouts, and you don't always show your client all of them. You might just show them the top three, right? You control the situation a little. You're making decisions, and then you're usually guiding them to a decision. So it's really understanding what needs to be done, utilizing the tools, for me, it's viewing myself as the facilitator.
Mm.
I'm not the expert on your business, but I can help pull from you the right information and guide you to what is the most important information that's truly differentiated, and then help you figure out how you can put the spin on that to make it ownable and go out and be competitive. And so designers, if this is where a point where they are in their career and something that they want to do, they can start demonstrating that in their work that they're doing that day. They can start asking questions about that brand. That's part of that discovery process and the briefing process. When your division, your client, whoever is trying to brief you, and this is something else we talked about a little bit, which was like, don't run to like, oh yeah, I got it. You want a new label for that. Let me run off and do it. Right. There's a little bit more to be done. More questions you need to ask.
Yeah. And I think that is the gate. I think the creative brief for me anyway, in my career going from corporate and then into agency life, that was the gateway drug for strategy for me.
Yes.
Because a lot of times you get a brief from a client, it's 15 pages long and it's full of all sorts of research and fluff and 15 divisions getting their thumbprint on it, and they can be very confusing
and very long.
And very long.
Briefs that are not brief.
Right. And so when I was at an agency I used to work at, I developed a one-page creative brief. So we would take the client brief and we would break it down into a very systematic structure on one page, because that a designer can internalize. But it captured, the market space, the competitive space, the communication hierarchy, who the customer avatar was, what was the need state that was being satisfied, all those sorts of things that are on a brief. And that was how I learned to start looking at design around solving a problem. And also that's where I started to develop my this is the important part, my vocabulary around how to position and describe the work and how the work was solving the problem. And,
exactly.
And you were saying how you had really strong convictions around, how what good design is made up of, the equal parts that good design are made up of.
Yeah.
What are those parts to you?
Yeah, so I have this Venn diagram. So it starts with like the strategy, the insights, the discovery, those discussions, the design thinking to understand what the problem truly is, the brief. So I'll give you an example. I had one brief where it said, we're going to do this new product. It's going to be softer than all the other products. So could you get some nice flowers and put it on this box? And I sat there with that brief for like a week. And I was like, well, we already put flowers on all the other packages. So I'd really like a softer flower, like, we already use, like, I was really stumped. And I just kept drawing the square because the product was in a square. And I kept, trying to figure out what I could put on there. We had already trained consumers that if we put water on a box, so this is like facial tissue, it wasn't wet inside. Put roses on the box, it wasn't scented inside. So how are flowers or anything going to say this is softer? And then I finally just drew, it needs to go in an oval. It needs to go in a different container. If you want someone to immediately at shelf look at it and realize this is going to justify this is like $3 versus $1, you couldn't just do it on graphics because people are just going to dismiss what's inside. So that brief kind of handcuffed me to this one solution. They had already decided what the problem was. The problem was graphics, and I needed to solve that. So that's where I'm like, the first of the Venn diagram is the strategy. What is the real problem to be solved? What liberties do we have on the brief? And then the second part is the bringing the stakeholders along for the ride. So like if I know I'm going to take somebody and go from like what they have today to truly solve their problem, I got to give them something dramatically different. They're going to get scared when I show them that dramatically different thing, and they're going to bring me right back to just a tiny little 2% tweak. So managing the stakeholder, you have to show like, okay, what's your bravery scale? And let me show you like another company that went, like, let me show you the Starbucks evolution. And like, are you talking about from, 1970 to 1980, or are you ready to go from 1970 to 2001? Like, so let's set expectations. You say you want it to look clean. So let's do some trend boards on what are the connotations and semiotics of clean. And so you're starting to expose them to the things that they're going to see on the design later. So when you just bring out this new shiny thing with green leaves, they'd already bought into the idea that green leaves we're going to signal clean to their customer, right? So it's a third of it, a third of your time needs to be spent on that strategy, the briefing. A third of it, you're managing the stakeholder. And then a third of your time is spent crafting the most beautiful, elegant, meaningful, where everything that you've brought in there, you can point to and say, this signals this color means this font reinforces it's more friendly, it's lowercase for this reason, right? You can unpack the design and tell them why it works, why it satisfies all of the things that you talked about in the trends and their appetite for change, why it solves the brief. But I don't think enough people in design, I don't think they spend as much time on those first two to ever get their great design solution approved. Because when you shortchange the first two, people pull back, they get really nervous. This is a really big thing. People are going to judge them on what design they approved and what goes out. They think of all the risk. Risk starts to drive their decisions rather than reward, and you end up with this really incremental, safe design. So to get those truly remarkable, game-changing, we're doing something completely new and different, you have to spend more time on these other things.
I think that really addresses one of the comments that I hear from designers a lot, which is, I have to spend so much time educating my client, and they bristle
Yes.
at that. And but by the same token, in their other hand, they're saying, I get so frustrated with my client, they won't choose the best design. And I'm like, hey, you got to realize those two things are related to each other. Like, you got to do the education, because that is what is going to channel them, and you have to take responsibility of channeling them into the design that is most appropriate and the best design for them. So I think
Yeah.
that's really, I love that. I love that triple Venn diagram
Yeah.
idea, and the idea of the bravery scale. I think that's brilliant. I'm going to totally use that. So when you are um, everybody who has come up in a career and had an incredibly successful career like yours, sometimes from a distance it's hard for people who are just starting off or people who are mid-career to really see or understand maybe where there were obstacles or stumbling points or difficult patches that were in your career that wasn't Christine Mao's career going up and to the right, consistently. What were some of those challenges that you faced in your career?
So I do think part of it is how other people would see you as design. Would they ask for your opinion or bring you in? Sometimes I was in my own head, and I had these really generous people, whether they're from coworkers or agencies, but I would do this to myself. I would sit in the back and I'd be like, oh, I don't think so. And that was my reaction. Like, oh, I don't think so. But I wasn't bold enough or brave enough to stand in front and say, I don't think the female consumer aged 30 to whatever is going to be excited about this, as I'm watching, seven men in their 50s decide what we're going to do for the,
Right.
sometimes like 18-year-old woman. And I would have the agency person next to me and they'd go, you need to say that out loud. So I needed nudges. I needed nudges to know that, and if I said it and they didn't agree with me, the floor wasn't going to open up. I wasn't going to fall through. I wasn't going to be dismissed. And so that was something that I had done to myself, and it held me back for a while. I was
Mm.
very, very kind of conservative or shy, or wanting to protect myself. If you wanted to know about the color, I got all kinds of opinion. I was ready to stand, move aside, stand back. But when it started to get to these other, which seemed more businessy or more important things, I would hold back. And so that is something that I think we need to do for each other. We need to support one another. When you see someone in the room and you know that they've thought it through and they've got something to say or something that you think should at least be discussed, it's on all of us to go, hey, it's your turn. Like, I think you have something to say. And then it's also for all of us to realize you're not going to get fired because you said something in one meeting that wasn't brilliant. So I think that was one of my hurdles, of just building that self-confidence,
Hmm.
to feel like I could raise concerns of what I was seeing in the room.
So we met at Harvard University. We were in a program called Business Perspectives for Creative Leaders that the AIGA put on, and I think they do it at Yale now. But
Yep.
that was the first. I had spent 15 years in the fashion industry when I went to that conference, and I realized when I got there I had never been in a room with 30 or 40 other creative leaders who kind of did what I did at my level, but in agencies and corporations. And it was like this massive epiphany, because I was like suddenly around my peers, and I realized how much I had missed in my career by not surrounding myself with peers like that. When you were there at Harvard, was that did you have a similar experience in terms of finding yourself in surrounded by your peers, or have you tried to do that through your career in order to get perspective on what you're doing and how you're going about where you're going?
Yeah, similar to you, because Kimberly Clark was located in Neenah, Wisconsin, not New York, right? So there's not a hotbed of creatives hanging out at the Starbucks, because we didn't have a Starbucks yet. Um, so when I got there out to the program, I was super intimidated by all of you. And I think I was assigned to one group. It was you and Stanley Hainsworth,
Yeah.
who had both, as said at this point, you had both like either studied or had been in theater. And the assignment they gave us is we had to act something out. And I was like, gosh. So yeah, that was just another example where when you're really nervous, you just have to like dig deep and move through it and see what happens. And you guys were very kind, and I don't know what it was I had to act out or how I did, but you were very kind and generous and didn't make me feel, like I was, less than. But I learned so much from everybody there, and I do feel like when you're with the community, that the community does do that. It's like, oh, I might know how to do this thing, but you're good at that thing, and you're willing to help me. Like, I can ask you. I knew I reached out to Elon after, and asked him for some advice on things, and some other people that, yeah, I've stayed in touch with. And you built that network. That network is so important. So, because we do all get into situations where it's like, oh, I don't know.
Oh, I know. And that was such a transformative experience. Like, I've stayed in touch with you. I actually still do projects with Michelle Ronson, who I've had on this podcast before. And she now has gone from being an SVP at Wells Fargo to now being one of the premier experts in user research, and was named like, an influencer, digital influencer on LinkedIn recently. And, but just that one 10-day experience, we made connections that have lived for, over a
Yeah,
dozen years. I mean, it's been really
yeah.
amazing. Um, do you, how do you, have you ever been part of a mastermind or any kind of a peer group, or do you just make those connections at conferences, or how do you do that?
For me, it tends to be the conferences,
Okay.
where I'd meet people. Even during the COVID, I managed to hook up with a couple like groups where it was a smaller, like 12 people meet once a month. So you could have those genuine discussions about, this is what I'm afraid of, this is what I'm working on. We had one last month, and it was like, what are our fears? What kind of leader are we going to be coming out of COVID? How did
Mm.
that change us? Um, and you could have with your peers these discussions of, because some people are really frightened, some people are really excited, some people are going to do more of this, some people just want to get out. um, but it was a safe place to have all of those discussions and not be judged, but talk to a peer, because your family can't always help you with those things, or your friends that are in different businesses, right? So it's, the peer group is really nice. Yeah, I had color marketing group was something I had been a member of, and they everyone comes together and you select the palettes for the year and you do a lot of trend forecasting. So you're meeting with the same group every year, year on year. So I built connections there. The things like how infused, they're a bit bigger, but I know people can find, like I end up just finding people that I've met elsewhere, and then sometimes they'll bring in a new coworker or something, so you extend your team, your network.
Yeah.
But I loved you had posted something online recently about how to nurture that network, and not be forgotten, and how to leverage that network, which I thought was really important for people to be reminded of that, especially when we're doing, still a lot of people are working from home. I'm still obviously working from home, at least through September. And now with things changing, we'll see.
Yeah, that was one of the things I said in that. I think it was a webinar or a video. Was that if there was one thing that I wish I'd known earlier in my career, it was that people that you work with, wherever you're working with people, they will eventually end up at another company, and so will you. And those will be your connections with these other companies. And I was like, when I worked with people for a number of years in fashion, and then suddenly they would end up at another fashion company. They'd leave for a promotion or more money or whatever. And then when I went out and was at an agency, I'm like, oh wow, I know people at Levi's and Walmart and Ralph Lauren, and it was just like suddenly I was like, oh, this is how it works. Like I had no schooling in networking at all.
Yeah, no, it was a surprise for me too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if you were at Kimberly Clark when I talk about this one particular case study a lot, and it's in CPG. So, okay, we're going back to CPG for a second. But I don't
Sure.
know if you were at Kimberly Clark when they did this, but at one point, Kotex developed a line of black packaging,
Hmm.
were you there when they did that?
That was my project.
Oh my God, we have to talk about this. So, having been in a CPG agency too, you talk about shelf presence and shelf sets a lot. When you go down an aisle, like say you're going down the fabric detergent aisle, it's dominated by blue and orange, right? Gain and maybe some green, and then Tide orange, right?
Tide.
They own that aisle. And then suddenly this little upstart of Method comes in with these clear bottles that are shaped like 70s vases, and they're in beautiful colors, and it almost looks like a home furnishing item, not a detergent. Massively disruptive visually in that aisle. When you walk down the aisle, they're like, what the hell is that? The black packaging of Kotex was the same thing. It was like this sea of pastel colors and flowers and waves and all this stuff. And then boom, it's like this block of black in the feminine hygiene aisle. Talk
Yeah.
about that and differentiation a little bit, and that shelf pop idea. Like, how did that come about?
So the bravery scale was off the charts.
Absolutely.
And the reason is they had previously done a packaging change, and they did a packaging change without improving the product. When you change the product, people expect the package, they expect a product improvement, and that wasn't delivered. And it gave people a reason to change. Either they couldn't find their package that they had before, or someone new would try it, and people must have been generally disappointed because the share was dropping, 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 dropping. So much so that it was a point of go big or go home.
Mm.
Just trying a different shade of pink is not going to get us out of this situation. This is serious. And so it was like, okay, what do you do? So again, let's go to what's the real problem, and let's start following people around. So let's pick a target. When do people adopt the brand that they're going to typically stick with for their life? And it's not when at the start because mom is buying it for you. It's when you start buying your own. So
Mm.
somewhere around 16 to 20, when you're spending your own money, this is going to be your product. So we started following her around, and having this pink, white, sterile, hygienic thing looked like I have to apologize that I'm menstruating. There's something wrong with me, and there's a medical device that can help fix me. And what they wanted was like, yeah, I menstruate, so what? The thing that like would just blend into my purse was actually neon colors that comes in a little black package, like a little black dress. accessorize it. This is part of my life. This is part of who I am. And when I go to the aisle, I can choose from 100 that are the same, or enter the little black box U by Kotex. So it started out with having a very specific target. So up until then, at least the brands I worked on, it was like, okay, so women from, whatever, 12 to 50.
50, right.
Yeah. And, what do they have in common? Not a lot. So this was like, the target was kind of like very young. And we're not going to worry about the 50-year-old. And true to, you hear the stories, like if you target and you do something really well for one group, the others will come. So I would have people stopping me at conferences going, I know you didn't design it for me. I know I'm not your target. I'm 45 years old. I buy that for myself. And it was successful also because it wasn't just the package. It was the lifestyle. It was the product inside was engineered different for your bodies when they're that age. The marketing was different. It didn't show women running down the beach on the white pony, but actually just, asking her boyfriend to go to the store and pick some up. Like it was more real and honest and genuine. So it broke through all that kind of stigma that had previously been associated. Yeah, so it was just bold and owning it. That was great fun to work on that. But that was one where there was a bunch of men who were standing there trying to decide what was that 16-year-old to 20-year-old going to want. And I was in the back going like, no.
Did you wait? Now, something that's massive must have gone to consumer testing. You must have been in focus groups. Were you part of any of those focus groups? They must have had them.
Yeah, I would sit behind, at the time it was a lot of, behind the glass type of research. But, there's a lot of decisions on what goes behind, yes, or, on that side of the glass, right? You have to narrow down from all of these to like 3, right? Yeah. So what 3 are going to go in there? And there was a lot of debate. And actually the one that's the group had picked out had to be removed from research after the first group because the moderator called and said, they're getting so upset that anyone would think that this was for them that we needed to take it out.
Wow.
And then I felt a little bit validated.
Yes, I bet. You're like, woohoo! You're like, they're quiet behind the glass chair.
Yeah.
Right.
They're like, is that okay that we take that one out? I was like, yep, that's absolutely, I'm not surprised. Keep going. Just take that one out. Keep going.
Awesome. So how do you get inspired? How do you stay inspired? We've both been around the block for a while. And what keeps you fired up?
I think travel. I haven't done much of that, but it's the travel, the new experiences, trying new things that I've never tried before, doing things with my kids. So by kids, I mean my 20, 23-year-old, 26-year-old. So we'll go traveling, hiking, whatever, going to the museums, the gallery, I think that typical stuff that you hear, and it's putting myself into situations that I haven't been in before. And trying new things, and then you bring those experiences back, and that enthusiasm and that ability to look at something through a different lens or a different point of view. Like, are we going to use the same target we've always used, or maybe do we look at something else? Do we look at this as a hygienic product, or do we look at this as a style, fashion, accessory product, right? How can I elevate things? How can I change things? So I think if you in your personal life do a lot of that, trying different things and looking at things with different lenses, you're more adept and comfortable encouraging others, because people will try to keep pulling you back to what I call the vanilla wafer recipe, right? The vanilla wafer, nobody loves, but nobody hates. No one will stop you from doing it, but no one's really that excited about it.
Vanilla wafer is pretty low on the bravery scale, let's say.
Right. So they're always going to try to bring you back to that. So like, how do you get them to the Oreo of your cookie scale?
Right. Well, it's been great talking to Christine, and I tell my guests that I'm going to hit them with a big, heavy question at the very end, but I forgot to tell you. So this is a question I always ask all of my guests, which is, do you have a personal manifesto or a mantra that you try to live your life by?
I don't know that it's like formally, like I can articulate it. We do have family rules. So the family rules are like, if you're in a dramatic country, or you always order the chocolate dessert unless you're in a dramatic country. You never hit a girl, even if she hits you first. Like you always wear your seatbelt. Like we have all of these kind of practical things. But then there's also like always do your best. And that's good enough. Like so like if your best today was, a B, be proud of that and celebrate that, because I'm proud of you that you tried and you were out of your comfort zone. Maybe you didn't ace it this time, but you'll get up and try again. And also, I found it's also important to know where you want to be in 5 years.
Mm.
And that will help guide all of those things, to tapping your manager or someone in your network of, hey, I want to do this. So I want to learn more about that. I want to start preparing. I want to experience. Can I ride with you? Can I go with you? Like when I got to Medline, it's like I didn't understand how you sell to a hospital. So it's like, hey, can I go along on a sales call? Can I go in the back of the operating and the sterile core and root around and see, like how the products are used? So it's always putting yourself into these new situations, but I don't know that it's a mantra, so to speak, that you are looking for, but
No, that totally qualifies. And so, I mean, you have lived you have, had such an amazing career journey that I just hope our listeners will take that mantra and run with it, because that is so true about having, the 5-year goal. It really drives all of the decisions that you need to make. Otherwise,
yeah, it won't just come to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the reason why I had an expat assignment in London is because I went to our CMO at the time and I said, I would like an expat assignment in London. And the response was, we don't have design there. And I was like, I know. That's why you need to send me. And I will build that discipline. I will build in the design thinking, and I will deliver the profitability that you've been looking for in that business. I will work with that team and I will do that. And about 18 months later, I got a call. Hey, Mao, would you think you would be, by any wild sense of the imagination, willing to move your family to London? And I was like, oh, funny you should ask. Of course. You plant those seeds of where you want to go, and you do all the work and the prep work to make sure that you're the best candidate for when that door opens and you're ready to go there. Maybe that's the mantra: plant the seed.
That is awesome. Plant the seed. That's awesome advice. So if people want to connect with you, Christine, where can they do that?
Okay, so I'm on LinkedIn, and I think that's how you reached out to me, on LinkedIn, and I respond. I do actually see if messages come in. I think that's the easiest way, and yeah, I would love to connect with people, especially if they're, thinking about like, what do I do next? I am worried about this, and we just have a chat. I love expanding my network too.
Awesome. Well, Christine, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today on the Brand Design Masters podcast, and I hope you will come back again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invitation. This has been a lot of fun for me and great to connect with you again.
Cool.